Ding dong YouTube, welcome back to the channel. I'm the Jobless Coder, and this week I had my second week of CBT therapy, and I'm going to be discussing in this video everything that entailed. If you're new to the channel, then make sure to click subscribe, as well as the bell icon to receive future updates on this video series where I will be discussing cognitive behavioral therapy that I am currently enrolled in, so that you, the viewer, can make an informed decision as to whether or not it's right for you. This week was divided primarily into two segments, the first dealing with depression and anxiety, and the second half of the night we talked about ways of coping with depression and anxiety, such as meditation. The night began once again by picking a mood from the mood wheel that we were given, and rating it on a scale from 1 to 10. It's not important to discuss why you feel a certain way, but it's more focused on how does that experience make you feel. After that, we began going over some more examples of anxiety and what it feels like, certain symptoms of having anxiety. We talked about the DSM, that's the Diagnostic Statistic Manual for the diagnosis of mental disorders. We talked about its certain criteria to diagnose GAD, which stands for General Anxiety Disorder. We reviewed a bit of the brain and looking at images of normal brains along with mentally ill brains and the physical difference between the two. A bit of psychology with science and therapy. The one thing I did notice was that there was a lot more discussion amongst the certain members of the group this time, where last time it was kind of a bit where everybody's shy, they're not willing to say certain things. Also, it's the first meeting of cognitive behavioral therapy. They don't want to share personal details, because again, the details are not what's important. It's how you feel and how you cope with your feelings when you're feeling that way. But then there's other things where it's just more of a general overview, like I feel this way when this happens, and this is what I do when I feel this way. After that, we watched a video by Will Smith where he was talking about skydiving and how strange it is that if you were planning something that was super anxiety-ridden, like jumping out of a plane, and you're thinking about it the night before while you're lying in your bed, and how odd it is that you're worrying about something that's not currently impacting you at the very moment.
Yeah, we should go skydiving tomorrow. And you go home and you by yourself, you're like, So then that night you're laying in your bed and you just keep, and you're terrified. You keep imagining over and over again jumping out of an airplane. You realize that the point of maximum danger is the point of minimum fear. The lesson for me was, why were you scared in your bed the night before?
And this is something I've suffered from my entire life. I worry about everything. I worry about 5 years ahead, 1 year ahead, 1 week ahead, 10 years ahead. It doesn't matter the time frame. If it's in the future, I'm worrying about it for some reason, even though it's not currently impacting me or my life at the moment. I don't know where to draw the boundary line between reasonable goal setting for your future and plain out paranoia. Because if you don't go through life with a set plan of where you're going, what you're doing, what you're working towards, then your life is going to be just as chaotic and turned upside down as it is if you are worrying about every single little bit of detail of your life every single day. And for some people like me, it's very hard to discern the difference between what's reasonable and what's just plain paranoia. So then after the anxiety portion, we went a bit into depression and talking about serotonin levels and how it's linked, depression and anxiety. And then we watched a couple more videos by some psychologists doing a speech or a talk. We did more thought experiments of coming up with certain situations that you would feel depressed or why you're feeling depressed, and just noticing what that feels like to be depressed but not really do anything about it. We even touched on some certain topics of suicide. It was even brought up that men are statistically more likely to commit suicide. One of the things I mentioned is a term that I cannot stand, and that is a quote, real man. You're not a real man if you cry. You're not a real man if you do this. You're not a real man if you do that. And I don't like that term for two reasons. The first is that you cannot define a quote real man unless you are defining it specifically with the criteria that fit within the culture that you're talking about. In certain cultures, the woman is the breadwinner. She's the one that's out working and making the living for the household, and it's the man that stays at home and takes care of the children. So if you're not a working hard-ass man, can you really say in that culture, oh, you're not a real man? The other problem I take with that statement is that there is absolutely no reward for being a real man. Like, what do you get? A trophy? Somebody gonna give you a medal because you're a real man? What does it even matter? So if becoming a real man doesn't earn you anything that's objectively tangible, then is there really a point in worrying about whether or not somebody says you're a real man or not? If you want to cry, go ahead and cry. I've done it myself. Then following that, we took a short break before coming back for the final half of the night, where we focused mostly on meditation. There was no exercise this week like the mindful eating that we did in the previous week, although we did discuss something called mindful walking, which is walking but with a purpose. You're going on a hike or you're going walking around the town, and your goal is to notice things that you've never really noticed before. And it doesn't have to be in the woods in some serene setting. You can do it in the city, you can do it anywhere, but the goal is to just pay attention to things, pay attention to the sky, pay attention to sounds, pay attention to buildings that you might have never even knew were there the whole time, even though you've done that walk 1,000 times before. Following that, we talked about a variety of different breathing techniques and certain meditation practices. We watched a video on it that had a lot of examples that were very relevant to my own life. And it was also very interesting, too, to kind of touch base again on the meditation, because I mentioned it before in the last week's video that I believe that those Buddhist priests that are deep, heavy in meditation, they have willfully put themselves into a high, instead of circumventing the process by just smoking weed and getting high. And when they're in that state of perpetual high, then they experience and they notice things that have been around them the whole time that they otherwise don't notice. So I think it was interesting to once again touch on the topic of meditation. And then just like that, 2 hours had flown by and we were at the end of the session. So that's all I have for this week's update. I want to thank you for watching the video to the end. And if you're interested in knowing more about this cognitive behavioral therapy, then check back next week for part 3 of this 6-part video series. And until then, I'll see you next time.
Smoke weed every day.